My name is Olga, and I'm originally from Caracas, Venezuela. That's really relevant to this topic because growing up in a country where censorship and lack of freedom of speech was predominant really instilled in me an appreciation for how essential freedom of speech is to a democracy. I'm also fascinated by the legal field, and I'm a part of Gen Z, which means that I understand just how ubiquitous social media is in modern society. For that reason, I decided to create my project in the intersection between law and freedom of speech and social media. Social media use is ubiquitous in modern American life. More than half of US adults have some sort of subscription to a social media platform and use it to get their news from those platforms, specifically Twitter/X. This shows just how important social media is in modern society for social-political conversations. Now, when I moved to the United States, I was really struck by the importance that American society instills on the First Amendment. You hear it mentioned all the time. And that's point number one that I want you all to remember today. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, among other liberties. But it was enacted in 1791 because it aimed to protect citizens from the government, meaning it's not meant to regulate companies or citizen interactions with other citizens. It's meant to protect you as Americans, US citizens, from governmental reach and to their liberties. I also want to mention that there's only been 27 successful amendments to the United States Constitution, which I believe greatly speaks to the importance of an amendment to American society, because it must be very universally popular for it to go through all the processes that it needs to pass in order to be an amendment to the US Constitution. Now, this is a legal concept that is very complex, and I'm going to do my best to simplify it for time purposes. Common carrier law is grounded in British common law and has been interpreted and used in American law as well. It essentially requires general providers of a service to not discriminate on who they provide the service to. If you go to a restaurant, they have the legal right to deny their service to you based on any choice or any characteristic that they choose. But a railroad is not able to discriminate against you and deny you their service because they serve a public purpose. Along those lines, there are 5 different criteria that are used to determine whether a company qualifies for common carrier status. That's if they have market power, meaning that they have influence in the market, if they are serving a public interest, like a railroad or a telecommunications company would, what the industry type is, and if they receive special government benefits. They must also be doing a public offering, which has very important legal implications for modern platforms, and that's where the heart of my project is. Is a social media platform like Twitter more like the New York Times, meaning that it has editorial discretion and can choose what content goes on their platform, or are they more like Verizon, meaning that they have to provide their service to anyone, and they're not responsible for the content therein? Right now, in front of the Supreme Court, there's a court case called Moody v. NetChoice. NetChoice is a conglomeration of social media platforms, and Moody is essentially 2 different states, Florida and Texas, which passed laws trying to regulate what the different content rules that social media platforms can have ought to be. So, for example, the Florida state law requires platforms to not deplatform journalists or political candidates, and this law only applies to social media platforms that have over $100 million in revenue or more than 100 million monthly users. These social media platforms are saying that this is an infringement in their free speech, which again wonders, are they speaking through the content of their users, or are they simply a platform facilitating their users for their own speech? I did a deep dive into Twitter/X's terms of service. While I was doing it, Elon Musk purchased Twitter, so that completely changed. That was really fun. Essentially, what Twitter purports to do is to be a free marketplace of ideas in the digital square. And that means that they will only moderate content if it is because of a heckler's veto, meaning the only reason that they will take down a post is not because they don't agree with the post, but because the post is sufficiently offensive that it will prevent or intimidate other people from contributing to the conversation. Twitter also has something called community notes, which does not aim to censor speech, but qualify it. Meaning, if someone posts something that has malinformation or is inaccurate, instead of taking it down, they have a community note to the post that qualifies the speech and says, no, what you see above is not right because X, Y, and Z. I believe that this approach is something that all social media platforms could take a note of, because if someone sees a post that's negative and it's taken down, they will never remember, they will never know that the post was wrong. If you qualify it, then you're contributing to the public conversation and you're allowing for a democratic society to have robust debate, informed, not censored. Coming from Venezuela taught me just how important that is. And my final paper essentially recommends to all social media platforms that instead of taking down posts, they qualify them. I also want to highlight something that I really like about the community notes approach. In order for a post to be qualified, it doesn't need to garner majority opinion. It needs to garner approval from the two sides of the aisle, meaning two people who have disagreed on previous posts must agree on the fact that this post is wrong, which I believe is very important, because if you have a minority group that is trying to fight for truth, but they are simply the minority in terms of numbers, they would never stand a shot at being able to qualify a post. So I believe that this combination of qualification and allowing different points of view to rise whilst keeping public discourse and public conversation safe and welcoming to every opinion will allow the United States of America to continue to be the country that I chose to move to when I couldn't remain in my country. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Olga. We'll now be taking any questions.
This is great and very timely, thank you. One thing that I was thinking about and listening to you talk is how the algorithm functions, which is personally one of my least favorite things about social media, is like, it's not like reading a newspaper where you can choose to go to opinion or comment or news or whatever it is you're interested in that day. It just feeds you more of whatever you were last looking at. So what do you think the implications are, like, with the fact that all social media platforms at this point basically function off of an algorithm?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question. And a lot of my project was delving very deep. I chose to focus on Twitter and X because Twitter and X has mainly speech content as opposed to videos and photos. So it was easier to examine how the policies were actually being applied. When Elon Musk bought Twitter and made it into X, he made it open source. Everything is open source. It's currently the only platform that makes everything open source, which I believe is extremely positive because it allows users to understand what the terms of service are that they are agreeing to. And so if you look at the Twitter terms of service, it's very rare that they will actually take down a post. They will allow users to either mute accounts, block accounts, or censor the accounts themselves. That's something that I believe is positive because it allows you to manipulate your feed. The algorithm part of it is, I agree, very tenuous. I believe that it's not as much a problem in Twitter as it is in other social media platforms that are completely closed source.
Thank you, Olga. This is really fascinating research. Your comment kind of leads me to my next question, which is, I know the research focused mainly on Twitter. Have you started to imagine any ways that a feature like community notes could be added to another platform that is primarily driven by visual media?
I do, because it's simply adding a qualifying comment at the bottom of any post. So if it's an Instagram picture, you can just add it at the bottom. If it's a TikTok video, you can just add it at the bottom. And so I do believe that it's feasible, and I do believe that this community-based approach to censoring social media is a lot more akin to what other societies were doing, where as a community we decided what speech is tolerable and what isn't, as opposed to allowing an obscure computer service somewhere else deciding who and what can be contributed to the public conversation. So I'm very for it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you found in your research any potential drawbacks to, like, community notes or any just opinions regarding that.
Absolutely. given that the community noters are people, there's always a risk that that system can always be hijacked by one side, say, of the political spectrum, or it can be edited so that only certain posts are qualified, and that can actually be double harmful because the posts that are not qualified, the entire community is trusting that they're not qualified for a reason, and so you're assuming that they're true. And that's very dangerous because then you're going to have a very distorted public conversation that's completely skewed and people are not even going to be aware of it. So there's certainly a danger to that as well.
Wonderful talk, Olga. It's really great to hear your research. And I love how you took so many really complicated issues and you laid it out really beautifully for us to follow. So I really appreciate that. This may be a little bit of a whole other topic, so feel free to pass. But I'm just curious what you think is going to happen with TikTok.
So what's happening with TikTok is not an outright ban. The lawmakers are requiring that the part of TikTok that is owned by the Chinese Communist Party is divested into an American-owned entity. That's a very large deal. That's a very large transaction. It's unclear who has the financial wherewithal to actually do that. However, they're giving it, I believe it's 270 days, which is around 9 months until that would be enacted, like the time that the deal needs to be completed. And of course, ByteDance, which is the corporation that owns TikTok, will appeal in the courts. I believe, realistically looking at it, this is probably a principled stance more than a practical one, because the courts will just hold this up indefinitely until there is a buyer or another deal is reached. Or that's my belief. I'm not a lawyer. But shout out to my advisor, Professor Gary Lawson, who inspires me every single day because I've never met such an intelligent, kind, amazing person. I just wanted to put that out there.
We still have time for 1 or 2 more questions. All right, sounds good. Thank you so much
for your attention.